First of all, I would like to say that at this moment I am very grateful to the professor. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule today. This is actually my first time coming to the university for an exchange. I have the opportunity to interact with some people here and to have some intellectual exchanges. Actually, I am simply a Buddhist in my beliefs. I have been a monk for 30 years, but in recent years, perhaps, it seems from a scientific perspective, including some comparisons such as those between Buddhism and the mind, I'm quite interested in this area. And I have also heard from others that the professor has made significant contributions in his field of research. So I thought we could just have a rather informal discussion for a little while and maybe share our own views. That's what I was honestly thinking. I myself am Tibetan by birth. My teacher specifically asked me to give a series of lectures to the Han Chinese people who are living here. So I actually often use Mandarin to give some lectures. At first, I taught purely about Buddhism for nearly 20 years, but in the past 10 years, I have perhaps focused more on connecting Buddhist experiences with modern science, including areas such as the field of psychology as well as neuroscience. Over the past 10 years, I have also made use of modern tools such as the internet and WeChat platforms. I have also come into contact with many scientists, including people who are currently conducting cutting-edge research in these fields. We are eager to exchange ideas, not just about the internal ways in Buddhism, but also about how science and Buddhism can be integrated in meaningful ways. There may be some areas where there are very good experiences, and I myself have focused on discussing aspects of consciousness in Buddhism, including various mind training techniques and meditation. In a moment, we can also discuss whether there are some commonalities from both the perspectives of neuroscience and Buddhist studies. For example, in Buddhism, from the viewpoint of Yogacara, consciousness, only school, as well as perspectives from Buddhist logic and reasoning, and many other viewpoints. So regarding these topics, is there perhaps any possible way for us to make further breakthroughs? Before we continue, I just like to understand a little bit more, if you don't mind, perhaps about your perspective. Now, as he steps forward in this entirely new and transformative era, I have watched some of his public speeches and read some of the articles that he has published on various topics over the years, including those specifically in China. Many young people are now reflecting thoughtfully on some of his ideas, which is quite interesting. So first, I'd like to talk about the science of neurocomputation as it stands today, as we know it. This science from the last era to now, over the course of time, hasn't actually been utilized for a very long time, but it has indeed changed many aspects of our lifestyle in significant ways. What do you think about the impact of neuroscience on our society today, in your opinion, including its remarkable influence on the world? What are your thoughts in this regard, specifically?
So I want to give just a few words on before we go to the practical aspect or technical aspect.
Okay.
Just a general. So first of all, I also want to thank you for this invitation. It's very unusual for a scientist to meet a spiritual person. I didn't have, in that direct sense, I met here and there, but for a few, but not in a full kind of a meeting. So it's very special for me and also for my daughter. And so thank you very much for the invitation. And in some sense, we also, of course, came to learn, not only to say, but also to learn from your perspective about how you see things. How do you see consciousness from your perspective, as you just mentioned, or or any other things that you are involved with, spirituality, what does it mean to you? So we also came to learn, of course. So it should be like a mutual learning process here. And the other general comment I want to say that I think it's very timely, such meetings, because especially in brain sciences, and maybe it's more general, but I think especially in brain sciences, there is a very clear need to expand from what we did in the past, which was more looking at brain from biological point of view. This is the more classical view, just as a biological phenomena. I think we came to understand in the last maybe 20, 30, 40 years, and computation in neuroscience is part of this understanding, that you cannot understand the brain if you only look at it from one perspective, which is biology. So I'm very much, and many of my colleagues, but especially in Israel, I really want to try to expand the whole field of brain sciences to include, for example, just to give you an example, for example, in the past, people that dealt with psychology, cognitive psychology, were not part of a physical center that will have in the same place physicists and biologists and cognitive scientists and engineers and philosophers in the same location. And I don't think we can, in the 21st century, we need to progress through this, what we call the multidisciplinary approach to the brain. And this, of course, includes phenomena like, maybe arts, the arts, and spiritual thinking, and many aspects that were looking at the phenomena of the brain but were never really interacting. And so the dream is that we shall have a center that is really encompassing spiritual people and artists and scientists, and break this classical narrow look at the brain. If we can do it, it will be a big achievement. So meeting with the maestro is, for me, part of this expansion. We want to expand rather than to narrow.
First, I'd like to say, if I may, because I am not a neuroscientist, some technical terms might perhaps not be all that very familiar to me, but whether it's neuroscience or psychology, biology, I'm really very interested in these fields. I also have this feeling that now, when it comes to our incredibly complex and vast frameworks and structures of consciousness and cognition, it could be, just as he thoughtfully pointed out and mentioned earlier in the discussion, that things are unfolding exactly the way he described before, that if we studied solely from a biological perspective or from a physics perspective, or even from a mathematical perspective, it explains a person's behavior and effects, including many different aspects and characteristics of a person and the phenomena that appear in real life. If there are special miracles, it is actually quite difficult to express or describe them clearly and precisely. I have always felt as well that it is likely necessary, whether in science or religion, many people should delve deeper using biology, neuroscience, physics, and cognitive science. Since cognitive science today is different from before, there have been some advancements. In addition, also various religious ancient doctrines of various religions. Perhaps we might discover some perspectives that are somewhat unique and interesting, and that are a bit different from the past. For example, the external things you observe, for instance, including a glass of water, like some Buddhist explanations might not be quite the same, especially in certain contexts. It's not that the brain initiates the processing, because these actions actually begin with consciousness. I'll drink this water. These intentions come from consciousness. Consciousness uses the eye, ear, and nose consciousness, five senses apprehending external environment. After apprehending the environment, consciousness then makes choices and discriminations. The eye, ear, and nose consciousness lack discriminating thoughts. Then it receives the information It's as if a camera has already captured this external reality. Once the image has been captured, the person then carefully selects from among all of the photos that have been taken, choosing the one they prefer most. Our eye consciousness captured, and the eyes fill many glasses of water. The glass of water I want to drink, I analyze it with consciousness. It is not the brain that does the analysis. So on this issue, it's quite possible that if we explore some of the more subtle aspects, it's possible that because there are differences. What I really want to simply say now is that in Buddhism, consciousness is considered the primary factor in everything. But unfortunately, up to now, there hasn't been a single scientific instrument or any scientific tool to prove its existence or to clearly explain the occurrence and development of many different behaviors.
That will be interesting to discuss, because I'll be happy to hear more, of course, as you said later. I'm sure my daughter Noah will also, how do you see consciousness? But if I'm only scientist now, I'm not saying that at present that we know to explain everything mechanistically. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that, certainly not. But still, the questions will come. At some point we should discuss it. What kind, if we are scientists, although not of us are scientists, but in principle, let's say that you have a phenomena, that I'm doing this, and you think that there is a conscious decision there, we can discuss that. Because also animals, very low animals, are also doing decisions like that, you know, to turn right, to turn left. Mm-hmm. There is a chemical here, there is something there, you know, so maybe you think about consciousness already at a very low level of any animal that behaves. So life, by definition, life must have some kind of behavior, and you have to have a choice to go right, to go left, to escape, and so on. So do we have conscious already at a single cell level and so forth? It will be one thing to discuss from your point of view. And also the question is what kind, if we talk about as scientists, what kind of experiment, let's say that we believe that there is something beyond the brain. Let's say that we believe there is something beyond the mechanism of the brain. How do we show it? Or is it just a belief? Or can we do something? You know, as scientist, I'm talking to show something. For example, a scientist can say, okay, let's look at the brain, because I'm a scientist, and I will look for a location, very small location, where I can put a drug and make you unconscious. That's what we do in hospitals. Yes, you put a person onto anesthesia, and he's not conscious. It's a chemical thing. You change brain activity by a chemical thing. It could be very local today. We know that in rats there is a very small region where you inject, very local, you inject anesthetic, and the mouse or the rat is unconscious. So it seems very physical. The correlation between the state of consciousness and the state of unconscious, let's call it, is very much dependent on particular brain activity, very specific region, very specific activity, that if you activate it's conscious, if you unactivate it's not conscious. So why should we assume that it's outside of the brain? Why should we assume that it's outside if I show you that I can manipulate the state of consciousness, whatever it means? We can discuss what it means, yes? Yeah. But at least when I talk now, I feel I'm conscious, you agree that I'm conscious, and when I go to sleep, I'm in a different state. When I put this anesthetic, third state, and all is directly manipulation of brain activity. So why should I say that it's not in the brain? It's not physical.
This issue is explained quite clearly in Buddhism, whether we are unconscious at certain moments under anesthesia, or perhaps in the subtlest states of meditation, or in animals such as the marmot for 3 months, not a single major discriminating thought will arise. And in the heavenly realms, there are also states where consciousness is extremely subtle. In these cases, it's not that there is no consciousness. He depends on either taking medication or following his regular routine and practices, as these are the main ways he manages his situation. They make their life force completely unmoving and enter a very subtle, calm state of mind just for a moment. Consciousness hasn't ceased at this time, but that it exists in a very subtle form. After anesthesia wears off, or when they simply come out of meditation, consciousness will manifest again. Therefore, in the Buddhist text, Abhidhamma Kosha, it discusses 5 distinct states of consciousness in total, including meditative absorption and anesthesia, and in sleep there is also deep sleep, the deepest level. But during sleep there is also a kind of diluted consciousness that is also wavering. So in reality our consciousness is in fact not shaken. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and on the other hand simply things are undetectable with scientific instruments. It's not non-existent. Right now there's a lot of dark matter in the world, and no scientific instrument can detect it, but we cannot say that it does not exist.
No, I just want to clarify. I'm not saying that there is no consciousness.
Right.
I didn't say that we don't have a notion of consciousness. I'm just asking whether it's not a physical phenomenon, that it emerges from the brain, and that's why you can manipulate it using physics like chemistry or anesthesia, or do you believe that there is, and if so, how do we check it, so to speak, if you believe that there is something beyond the physics of the brain with all its states of consciousness? And of course I'm saying that, of course, when you are unconscious there are some reminiscence of consciousness maybe that you cannot see, but later on it comes back. This is fine. And also I'm not saying that science understands the notion of consciousness yet, or maybe never, I don't know, because maybe it is such a complicated brain state that emerges from all these million of activities of neurons and all that we will not be able, in principle, maybe even not to understand it, or maybe yes, I don't know. And maybe the whole notion of consciousness will disappear at some point. Maybe it's a word we are using to explain something we don't understand yet. I don't know. So I'm not saying that there is no notion of consciousness. I feel conscious, you feel conscious, so we have to respect it. I'm just asking whether it's not a phenomena as a physical phenomena. That
Whether
this particular machine, or even machine, I wonder what the maestro feels about consciousness of lower animals, because all the behavior I mentioned before, monkey can do and mouse can do, reaching or taking and tasting and eating and crossing the street. They have also to do these decisions. So they must be also conscious in your definition, and also mine. I agree that there is consciousness also, but I don't know if you believe that there is consciousness also to any living. But I'm not saying that there is no consciousness. I'm only trying to understand whether you feel that there is something beyond the physical biological activity of this animal or this animal or this animal. And that's all what I was asking.
It's quite interesting to think of.
Very natural.
Actually, to be honest, I have always personally felt that in our ongoing and current research process, as we proceed at this stage, from the perspective of neuroscience or biology, it is absolutely very necessary to pay close attention to the individual aspects of consciousness in particular. For example, in the context of Buddhism, it discusses the nature of consciousness, the origin of consciousness, as well as the process of the continuation of consciousness, as well as the various different functions and roles of consciousness and so on. It discusses these aspects thoroughly. If these principles were combined with modern neuroscience, in some cases it might perhaps be even better. However, I don't necessarily believe that at least not entirely, that all consciousness originates from various neural elements. If consciousness was just from neural elements, then just before consciousness completely ceases, these neural elements would in fact actually, in reality, generate when a person dies. In most cases, many of the elements in our body do not, in fact, actually cease to exist. If we undoubtedly acknowledge the existence of an independent consciousness, it has a great deal of continuity. This includes the many theories about past and future lives that exist in our world today. If you don't acknowledge this, I think that even now in the world, there are people who can recall their past and future lives, people among scientists, and even among people with no religious beliefs at all. Moreover, if we do not acknowledge this continuity of consciousness and believe that the mind is produced solely by material things, this presents certain difficulties indeed. So I think that consciousness does not transcend matter, but rather they are two different elements. In Buddhism, consciousness depends on the 12 links of dependent origination. It depends on its causes, conditions. As for material things, in particular, they have their own external causes and conditions. So these external material causes and conditions, although they can have a certain effect on our consciousness, they can actually really strongly disrupt it and can also gradually bring about happiness, stimulation, and so on. That's one aspect of it. On the other hand, from the Buddhist perspective, although these are lower animals, they have consciousness. Consciousness definitely exists in them. They want to drink water, feel pain, and experience happiness. So in Buddhism, we believe that animals just like us have perception and the ability to make choices. Is that they are more confused and less intelligent. They're not as particularly sensitive as we humans are. Therefore, we believe that with confidence, the lives of animals and the lives of humans are both incredibly valuable and important.
Yeah, just a comment, and then maybe Noah wants to ask something, because I just want to say that it's true, and I agree that at least today, the only thing we can say as a scientist, I'm talking about scientists, is to find correlations. And that's why my friends that are working directly on consciousness, like Christoph Koch and others, are talking about the biological correlates of consciousness. So when you're in one state, there is this activity. When you're in another state of meditation, let's say, there is another activity. So they can only speak and explore scientifically what is the correlation between this activity and this conscious state. Sleep and this and that. They can certainly not say anything today, and I'm sure that the master knows that it is called the hard problem. The hard problem is not only to explain the correlation, but to explain this very clear feeling, a very subjective feeling that I am in conscious state now, and I know what's happening around me. This is very subjective. It's very strong in me and you and everybody. And this science today, and maybe never, will be able to explain this particular subjective feeling, but it can explain, or not explain, but it can do the correlation between this feeling and this activity. It's clear correlation. So there must be something, as the maestro just said, there is this content of the brain, there is activity that correlates with this conscious feeling, but the feeling itself, I think it's even beyond science. I don't think that science can deal with subjective feelings. You say it's painful. I feel pain now. Okay, so there is activity in the brain, and this activity correlates with my pain, but I am now experiencing the pain. Nobody else experienced the pain. It's very specific to me, subjective, and I don't know if science has the tools, in principle, to say something about this subjective feeling. I don't know if we can ever say something about subjective, and that's maybe where Buddhism comes and meditation and things like that can somehow manipulate these things. But and we'll discuss later how can we communicate and make it more clear the question. So maybe we can maybe ask better question in science through the Buddhistic understanding. That's a question. But I agree, there is a limitation of when I say consciousness and biology, I only explain some part of the correlation, but not the content itself, not the qualia, the quality, the personal quality. Science cannot deal with it.
Can I just phrase it as a question?
Sure.
What type of knowledge or understanding does the master think that science can contribute? How does he see the part of science in
Buddhism?
Not in Buddhism, but in gaining more understanding or knowledge of consciousness?
Actually, I've also been thinking about this issue. About 10 years ago or so, I personally composed and wrote something that is called A Treatise on Buddhist Science, which is a work I authored. This topic was also mentioned in it. But in reality, some of the current scientific approaches to truly study our consciousness in depth have certain limitations because science itself is still constantly evolving and researching, and even scientists believe they are still exploring. It's not as if they can be completely certain that all truths have already been thoroughly and definitively studied and examined. That's one aspect. There's another aspect as well that should be considered, especially regarding traditional views among Western scientists. They often rely on speculation and various instruments to conduct experiments, tests, and make judgments. That's the process they follow. So when it comes to certain states of consciousness, in fact, some principles can be inferred through speculation, and we can understand truths about consciousness. But for some things, as the professor just mentioned, it's true that everyone has their own continuity in their lives. Like what we discuss in Buddhism, whether it's so-called karma, feelings, or awareness, all of these are continuously existing and unbroken. So if we try to use a purely scientific approach to prove the current state of consciousness, I think there are definitely certain kinds of difficulties. Science can use medicine to make judgments, but I've seen that many scientists, including those in biology, when they conduct research, they treat human consciousness as just a carrier of life using its biological carrier. Then psychologists, they study it through the carrier of feelings. Neurology treats it as just a neuron. So I think that many scientists, in my opinion, they conduct research at the material level, but matter and consciousness are completely different kinds of things, because consciousness in Buddhism is no color, no and there is no substance that can be clearly identified or specifically defined as nothing, but it truly does have a formless. Everyone has a different carrier for their consciousness. So Buddhism uses its methods, and other religions also have their own ways to study it. If a religion doesn't have its own specialized system for research, I think that much of modern science may face certain difficulties. Current science still needs to go further in making careful and considered judgments about the study of consciousness.
I have one related question.
In
principle, let's say that I build in front of you now.
A building.
No, I build now. I will build now.
A building.
In front of you.
Uh-huh.
I will take pieces, physical pieces, that we shall agree that it's physical.
Uh-huh.
I'll take an atom and another atom, I
Yeah.
connect now here,
Yeah.
and I build a baby
Uh-huh.
in front of you,
Mhm.
a robot, a baby. And this robot would start to behave. I would hug him, I would take him, I would say shalom, hello, and all that in front of you. And eventually this baby will become big, and he will say, I have consciousness. I feel, I'm sad, I'm happy, I want to talk, but I build it in front of you. Let's say I cannot do it today, but let's say that I could do it. Will then Buddhism will say it's only physical, or you will say at some stage something else came out, don't know what, and made this machine, so to speak, because I built it in front of you from physical elements, adopted consciousness. How will you?
Right.
Because if this will be the answer, we cannot do anything scientific.
In fact, Buddhism has long possessed and maintained this kind of awareness for a long time. When it comes to the involvement of consciousness, for example, there is a consciousness in beings born from wombs and from moisture. There are also beings that are born by transformation, and those that are born from eggs. There are indeed many different ways of coming into existence. When the external conditions are fully present, for example, in Buddhism it is said that a baby's body can sometimes actually be born inside a lotus flower, and there are stories in history. Then in generally moist and consistently damp places, such as, for example, in manure, some living beings are also produced called moisture-born. And then there is the so-called worm-born type, just like us humans today, for example. These are the 4 different ways of coming into being, generally, as we have just recently mentioned. For example, if atoms are stacked together, and if scientists could truly control and implant consciousness, then it could be said to be quite possible. But as we can quite clearly see, at this point, many scientists, when it comes to actually controlling consciousness and directly implanting it, so far there are no successful cases. And in Buddhism it says, for example, during the process of parents seeking conception, such as consciousness plays a meaningful role, which parent's body the consciousness enters into. This is determined by causes and conditions. Apart from this, we can simply make assumptions. We can put it this way as a hypothesis, but hypothesis also needs to be relatively reasonable in order to become a strong basis for it. If this hypothesis could truly be realized, then it would be possible. But up to now, when it comes to scientists actually creating the life of sentient beings, it should be said that it is not possible if there are sufficient causes and conditions. Buddhism accepts it. For example, for human bodies, for those of other sentient beings, the consciousness will also seek out all the things it needs. There is a point in Buddhism, many forms of consciousness are invisible to us. There are so many people eagerly searching for his next life. There are especially many such consciousnesses that are seeking their next rebirth. So in this regard, Buddhism actually has relatively clear answers.
Okay, so I want to start with one question that
我首先
because
想问一个问题。
the master was interested in, or actually he was, you mentioned it is, and he feels, and I believe he's right, that science on its own, as we do it today, is insufficient to understand, for example, consciousness, but maybe also other aspects. So he believes that we should somehow integrate additional knowledge, let's say, from Buddhism. But how does he see it? So in what way can we integrate it? What will be a good way to progress in terms of the connection? How does he see it? Because especially when you wrote a book about science, how can we interact? I mean, practically, so to speak.
The main reason I wrote this book at the time, it's because back in the 1970s and 1980s, historically speaking, for a long time, many people considered Buddhism to be superstitious. Many such views. So at that time, I deliberately used the language of scientists, including Einstein, the renowned theoretical physicist. Russell won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950, as well as Jung and his entire in-depth process of carefully and thoroughly studying, analyzing, and reflecting on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, dedicating significant time and effort. In my book, it doesn't primarily focus on the study of consciousness and mind. The main point is that scientists, in fact, did not actually regard Buddhism as, in any sense, a superstitious religion. This is the primary and central topic specifically discussed in detail in my book. Now, I feel that at the very least, scientists should try to understand the e.g. the Yogacara Shastra in Buddhism, including some viewpoints from the Yogacara school and certain nuanced and distinctive views which are found within Vajrayana teachings. This time I talked to some Western scientists and recommended it to them as well. If it is a relatively simple situation, for example, perhaps from the perspective of science, the complexity of the human mind is actually just as intricate as the human brain you just saw. In fact, our minds also possess this kind of complexity, even though it does not have a material structure in the physical or tangible sense. But in reality, when it comes to the human mind, for example, the number of distinct thoughts we have at any given moment in time, including all the subtle discriminative thoughts of the mind and its mental factors, there is actually a tremendous quantity involved. Therefore, I firmly believe that, in my view, from the Buddhist perspective, it can be said that some treatises on the nature of consciousness, when scientists carefully and methodically study them, could there perhaps be mutual stretching far beyond what the eyes can see into the unseen distance. It is important to note that many foundations can be found within these intangible forces.
But let's continue with that, because that's important. Because that's very important. Because if and I agree also that we are dealing only with physical matters, but that's by definition science, and there is an existence of some other other level of, let's call it description, let's call it mind. So there is a matter, and of course the question is, can we ever connect the two, or are they separate entities that sit on one on top, so to speak, of the other, but they are not the tools that you are using to investigate the matter are different tools, let's say meditation or Buddhism or whatever, the tools to deal with the mind. But as scientists, I can learn a lot about the mind from this other perspective, but the question was, can I use scientific tools to understand better the other level? Because if it's not matter and science can only deal with materialistic aspects, then by definition we are limited as scientists, and there is no interaction. Of course we can expand our knowledge, and the master can expand his knowledge on the brain, but are they connected in a way that we can use one tool to understand the other, or the other to understand the first, or if they are not separated completely? Because if they are separated completely, we cannot talk with the same tools. It's different language.
I think there is indeed a connection. There is definitely a certain relationship. However, this particular relationship, for example, in Buddhism, when we talk about consciousness, it is said to exist as an independent entity, but material phenomena can also have an effect on it. So what kind of effect does it actually have exactly? This is how I see it myself. For example, if we try to prove consciousness solely through neuroscience, also difficulties, but the brain and its incredibly complex neural activity do have a significant impact on our consciousness. So what kind of impact is that? Once your brain has a problem, or when it encounters certain abnormal conditions, it directly affects a person's intelligence and consciousness. However, if we say that everything is entirely determined by the brain, there are some challenges. For example, in recent years, during the past several years that have just gone by, we have many successful heart transplants around the world. After the heart transplant surgery, originally, we believed that the heart does not have neurons for memory and does not actually serve this function. However, after some heart transplant surgeries, this is related to the personality of the deceased before their death, completely identical. Moreover, they are able to recall many different things from the past, including memories and experiences from their own lives. Some things related to this person certain situations from the previous heart transplant recipient's life, they are able to recall them. Therefore, in some of the esoteric teachings of Buddhism, it is said that although consciousness is formless, sometimes it relies on the brain and sometimes it relies on the heart. So if we do not acknowledge or even recognize the existence of an independent consciousness and only just rely on the brain, I think certain difficulties exist. Therefore, in Buddhism, we believe that the primary cause is the mind itself. For every sentient being, the cause of their own mind is ultimately their own mind. But the body does in fact have a noticeable effect on it. It really does. For example, if we take a tree, the soil and fertilizer outside have an indirect effect on it. Whether the fruit that the tree bears is sweet or not, all of these are external influences. But the tree itself, in fact, has its own seed. So external matter has its own seed, and our consciousness also has its own seed. If we do not acknowledge this and try to prove consciousness exists through the body, there are certain difficulties. I was wondering if there is a way, just like in neuroscience, you have reductionism, where a very complex system is reduced in the simplest way. By breaking it down step by step, we are simplifying the concept until we reach its most basic, and then carefully analyzing it from that particular perspective. Then, from the perspective of the entire biological chain as a whole, there is a holistic analysis, a holistic viewpoint. Similarly, when we look at consciousness, it also, in addition, has a fundamental and significant reductionism of awareness. From this particular perspective, we can clearly see the different levels and the various complexities of consciousness. Can some of this complexity be explained? Otherwise, a wide variety of different problems and challenges that we regularly encounter in our everyday real, compared to our usual everyday and ordinary states of consciousness, still definitely have certain differences. Breaking down consciousness, because consciousness is very complex. According to Buddhist views, for example, all of the vast, complex and intricate neural interconnections that exist within our brains, it could be among the sense bases, such as the sense consciousnesses of the body, the eyes, the ears, and the nose. And then each consciousness also has many. Its fundamental basis is actually mind consciousness or alaya consciousness. So if we were to break down consciousness itself in its entirety and as a whole, just like the brain itself, from the perspective of neuroscience, in your opinion, is it possible perhaps to study it in any meaningful way in relation to the level of consciousness? From a reductionist approach, how is consciousness viewed?
怎么看待 ？OK，
So you see, that's I think that's the problem with. So you're right that science is trying to reduce the complexity of a problem, and then of course you lose some of the more fine details, but maybe you capture, hopefully, maybe you capture some essence of the phenomena. If you are doing good reduction, and that's the success of physics, for example. But in brain research, it's not so simple. We are not sure that if we do reduction, we may be losing something very important. That's not so clear. But anyway, in principle, again, I see a problem, a principal problem. But although you said that there is, of course, connection between the, let's call it the mind, in the term of, let's say, Buddhism, and what we call consciousness, which I said before, it's only correlation of the matter manifestation, or correlated to a phenomena that we can call consciousness, sleep, or this, other, and that. It's only correlation, but I don't understand what I guess you understand is this high-level, personal, clear levels of consciousness from a religious point of view or spiritual point of view. And as I feel, and that's the frustration, because you want to combine. I also feel myself that science is limited, and maybe we have to give up, so to speak, to say, okay, it's limited, it can ask this. But on the other hand, I have a feeling, and that's, I think, one of the purpose of such meetings, is to try to find some important links that can really make an advance in understanding, let's say, consciousness, which we talk about consciousness because it's such an important and common feeling that we are conscious, and but I want to advance, let's say, if I want to advance in research, I still can't see exactly what will be a good method or paradigm to take knowledge from, let's say, Buddhism and bring it to science or scientists, so that together, somehow together, we should do something better in terms of understanding the phenomena, or beyond what we do as scientists. Because again, we are limited by the tools, by the concepts. Should we go out of ourselves? Should we do new experiments? Should we put into our teaching also Buddhistic teaching into the science? Will it help us to do better experiments? Because again, we are always limited by the scientific method. It's not easy for me to go out of it and do something new if I don't know exactly what kind of new things can I do, again, using my scientific method, which is very limited maybe. So that's what we are looking for. What kind of, beside the fact that it will be interesting and broadening, we can interact, it will be interesting, but I mean, just from scientific point of view, can we work together and create something breakthrough in understanding science? Or maybe not. Maybe Buddhists will stay Buddhist and scientists will stay scientists, and both of us will try to understand a phenomena. We shall be limited by our tools, he will be limited by his tools, and we shall go in parallel. That's a question, I don't know the answer. But of course I would like to find really common tools to advance the field. But I don't have good ideas now how to do it, so to speak. But maybe he has some good ideas how to do it.
I noticed that you also mentioned this in some of your publications. Some research tends to lean towards Buddhism. Have you yourself looked into other religions, or in your field of research, is there a tendency towards Buddhism? I'll explain. As for my own particular approach to this, well, this is how I generally tend to think about it. Actually, when it comes to understanding consciousness, Buddhism does in fact provide some very clear explanations, and in many cases these explanations are actually quite detailed as well. In science, as we often observe in practice, a comparative research method involves the use of comparison as a research approach. So with comparative research, I actually think that many scientists nowadays, regarding Buddhist studies of consciousness, or who truly and deeply understand the current and actual state of consciousness, the number is actually quite limited. Originally, our mind consciousness, sense consciousness, and the more complex aspects, such as conceptual and non-conceptual consciousness, these are actually quite simple and fundamental concepts. But even among the psychologists we've already encountered so far, they don't really have a deep understanding of these either. So, on the one hand, we could say we need to use scientific perspectives and instruments, and on the other hand, actually, if there are clear texts and well-documented records in the original books, we should also make comparisons. There are also some practitioners, both in modern times and in the past, combining these with their subjective experiences. Actually, in my opinion, when it comes to research, it's not absolutely necessary to have a specific tool. If we use reasonable, thoughtful inference to make our arguments and points, carefully considering all available information, that is also, in fact, a completely valid method. That's my perspective on the matter. My second point, which I just mentioned earlier, maybe you've also said something quite similar in certain kinds of situations. Perhaps if the goal is to focus on research, there are Buddhist perspectives. So I would also like to ask, if you lean towards Buddhism, which viewpoints do you align with? That's one question. Also, I firmly believe, as you just mentioned, that art and religion are very important. Einstein once said something, as you may know. He said that our life is like a tree, and science, art, and religion are three essential parts which complement and support each other. But I see now many scientists, some of them only stand on the broad, lush, green leaves of the tree of science and do not acknowledge other religions and arts. Some religious people who only quietly sit on the high branch of their own religion without ever considering other perspectives or viewpoints, and do not recognize the other two branches. If that's the case, then many of our current problems may remain unsolvable. Scientists do not acknowledge religion and art. Religion and art ignore science, although science must be recognized, but some scientific phenomena cannot be explained. Many inexplainable problems, which also rely on subjective consciousness and religion for explanations.
Well, I'll try to answer it, although I don't know how we saw it through my writing, because I didn't study Buddhism actually, although I'm doing some little, through my daughter influence, some practice in meditation, Zen Buddhism. We have a teacher in Jerusalem and I go every week. I should do more. So that's my only, and talk to Noah, because she has ideas and perspective that I don't have. Although she's a scientist, but she has a more comprehensive view. So that's my main influence. And in many ways, I guess I'm here in some sense because of that, but I'm really certainly should read much more, absolutely, and learn much more, because, and that's what I wanted to say after what he said, and also I thought about this, that I have a great appreciation to somebody who invested so much of his life to this ancient understanding and knowledge and practice, that to come to this understanding, let's say, even of this categorization. You mentioned the different states of consciousness that people like the master, I guess, experienced themselves. They can do much better distinctions, certainly, than anybody that we investigate in the lab, because he already passed through these states of brain that are correlated with these different states of consciousness. And in that sense, I can see a very fruitful collaboration, because you have somebody who can very systematically, because he is so experienced from introspection and from practice, to do these distinctions. This could help us certainly, as scientists, I mean, because you have this categorization and this distinction, which are clear to the one who experienced it. It could help us to focus better on particular set of experiments, which could be biological recording from the brain during different states, correlate activity. As again, we cannot do more than correlation, but at least I can refine the correlation, because there is already a priori knowledge from this other field. So I can see in that sense could be enrichment of understanding on a limited scale, because it's still scientific, but it's a better kind of, until somebody comes with distinctions, it's hard for the science to find them. But if you already have some kind of knowledge about what kind of conscious levels, maybe you reach 12 of them or complex of them, then we can do better research. That's one aspect that I can see, maybe a fruitful interaction. The other thing I think, but I would like also to ask, whether the feeling of the master is that during meditation or during this practice, I, as a scientist, let's say, doing practice and coming to these states which I'm not used to be in, but maybe I could practice it, then it could, in that sense, maybe influence my general state of creativity. Because, of course, one of the problems of every scientist is to go out of what he's accustomed to in the limited scale of what he knows, the friends, what he studied, and maybe through meditation come to a new state that could help me to, bring new ideas into my science. But so it could be also very beneficial, maybe, I don't know, for myself or for any scientist to practice something that is different than what he's used to. And this could maybe help me to enhance my creativity in many fields maybe, but also in science. I wonder if there is a feeling that a practice like that, beside helping my state of mind, maybe my relaxation and so forth, can it also bring me to a new, because after all, we need to break through, because we don't understand, science is really limited, brain science is limited. maybe this kind of interaction could bring me to a new state of mind, a new creative mind.
This has been a wonderful exchange and conversation today. Personally, I am extremely, truly very grateful for everything. To be honest, I have to say when it comes to meditation, because science is, by its very nature and definition, an academic discipline, while meditation is an experiential practice, in a certain sense, learning and practicing do in many ways share some common ground. But in certain fields, quite often you see, because meditation relies on a very calm, peaceful, and quiet state to sustain its state of mind, in the end one comes to understand a great deal of knowledge. So I think that what you just mentioned is actually quite important, and I wanted to highlight that in academia, we should not only study things theoretically, it should be from truly and deeply gaining a profound and genuine understanding of its very essence in its truest sense. For example, in particular, our ongoing research on the mind should go beyond textual or academic study. If we experience ourselves, maybe, just maybe, it would actually be even more groundbreaking. This is, without a doubt, one very important point to consider. I think many scientists nowadays, including Steve Jobs, who was at that particular time present in the room, he said that much of his inspiration came from meditation. And then I saw right there the internationally acclaimed author of the book Homo Deus. He also wrote at the end of his book that much of the inspiration in his book also came from his meditation practice. Many great masters in Tibetan Buddhism like us, after meditating for a long time, eventually have their wisdom burst forth explosively. It's not a process that depends on conceptual thinking or on manipulation. At a certain point, through practice, one comes to recognize the true nature of the mind and also realizes the true reality of all things in the world. At this stage, perhaps in theory, no amount of explanation can compare to personally observing the mind, and researching in this way may actually lead to greater breakthroughs. In my own view, and I firmly believe this, if study and practice are thoughtfully combined together, the results may be more evident and noticeable, particularly when observed over time. If one relies on texts and speculation without actually practicing meditation, there's something that may never be figured out just by guessing, no matter how much effort we put into trying to solve them this way. Sometimes guessing simply isn't enough to truly understand or find the answers we're looking for. I met a scientist. He believes that meditation should be included in the science of mind. It is the most cutting edge and innovative approach in the field today, setting new standards for experts. I agree, because our world, material world and spiritual world, the material world can essentially be fully understood through inference. When it comes to our spiritual world, perhaps without meditation, without spiritual practice, there is no way to truly understand it. Once we begin to practice, no matter how you put it in words, in reality, when the time comes, we will understand it very clearly ourselves.
I just want to say something that is related to that from my own experience, because I absolutely agree that there is a missing aspect to the whole process of science, which is almost, I can almost say that it's almost not allowed in this practice, is to have this kind of intuitive, emotional, unexplained, not logical, let's call it spiritual or emotional, that it's not part of the party, it's not really part, it's not accepted in some sense. And in the last few years, I must say, and especially because of some experience that I had with artists that I tried to bring together, two scientists, and be together for a weekend of a retreat, just to discuss a creative process. When do ideas appear? How do they see their own creative process? Just to interact with different language, different culture. This by itself, I think it was almost 10 years ago, something like 10 years ago, I saw that the way they react, these are artists, they work a lot from intuition, and they are very aware of the process of intuition, and they enable themselves to express emotions, even crying. While they discuss their creativity, the art, this was new to me in terms of interaction.
Uh-huh.
Because it was a seminar.
Uh-huh.
So it was like they gave lectures and suddenly they cried, or they had these memories, and they were very connected to the experience of the process of making a picture, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're an artist and your parents are artists, you know, and we are almost not allowed. So I absolutely agree that this will enrich the capability to be involved also emotionally and at least feel it,
Mm-hmm.
experience the emotional aspect of what happens to me when I generate some idea, or when I talk to people about my science. If it would be not only clean, scientific, but also I will be myself there,
Mm-hmm.
not only my, so to speak, brain, but
Mm-hmm.
the whole self, its emotion, its consciousness, all this, if I can bring it
Mm-hmm.
also to students,
Mm-hmm.
I think the experience will be much richer.
Mm-hmm.
This I completely, absolutely agree, and I think we miss it, and some scientists are trying to do it through activity and movement while teaching or something like that, because there is something very, very constrained. We are constrained in the language of science. It's beautiful, it does wonderful things, really. Medicine, machines and all that, but there is something, so I agree that experience through meditation or through introspection or whatever you want, to bring myself as a complete entity, rather than the logical part in me and the scientific part in me. So that's why I'm seeking for some kind of integration. And this emotional aspect, experience aspect, is absolutely part of it. Should be part of it.
There are many such sayings. If we only memorize things in our minds and can recite them, that is, in fact, a particular kind of knowledge, is specifically knowledge of the brain itself. But it's not enough to just remember it in our minds. We also need to continually familiarize ourselves with it in our hearts. It becomes knowledge that is both internalized and reflected in action. This kind of knowledge will truly take root in reality. So I also understand that nowadays, including in various research laboratories and academic fields across multiple universities, if the subject involves religion or the arts, it is important to keep in mind that in some cases, or under certain circumstances, there may be specific limitations, that this applies to research, academic disciplines, and even the teachers themselves. This is basically the same all over the world. In research fields and in standard classroom settings, such as those typically found in universities or academic institutions, for example, if religious rituals or spiritual practices are present, basically participation is generally not really allowed or permitted in almost any place or country anywhere in the world. But in reality, if we want to live a complete life, perhaps spiritual practice, including certain significant aspects of art and religion, if we don't talk about them, life might be rather dull. Personally, I really strongly agree with this. And if there is any need for collaboration in the future, I would be very happy to do so.
It will arise. We shall.
Be created.
It will be created,
Yeah.
because if it's okay with the master, in the new building, in the new center that I showed you, I would very much like. We have to find ways, but I'm sure we can solve it. It can be solved to have maybe. We have a very, very talented group of students, very intellectual, very, very smart, but I guess many of them are not doing anything that you just discussed. This personal experience, this studying, or at least beginning to understand what are the other directions that could be used to live, not only to live a wholesome life, but even in their own field, to see new perspective and understanding of what they own, they do, and so forth. So I will try, if it's okay, to find a way to bring the master, let's say for a week or something, into the center, and to have an intense course or intense teaching, whatever he wants, finds, and then I can arrange for the students to find the time, and it could be a very special experience for all of us. I'm sure it will be very, very attractive to many of the young generation. I think all of us understand that there is very, very strong limitation in terms of understanding, so to speak, human condition, life, by the way we do it only. And I think it will be wonderful. It can be if the master will agree. Then we can arrange the technical aspects. It will take some time, but the building will be ready in a few months, and then we can start to think about new directions.
There really shouldn't be any problem at all. I'd be absolutely more than happy to help, of course, because I don't really actively seek out anything else at all. What I truly hope for is that we can continue to find inspiration for our minds, whether it's science or religion or even many other things, such as ultimately it can be said that we're all seeking a kind of truth. As for myself, it's true as well. Maybe today is the first time we've met, but in the days to come, it should become clear that things are actually really absolutely quite simple. And apart from this, I don't really actively pursue or engage in anything else, at least not in my free time. Although it's quite far for me to come here from China, I don't feel tired or anything because of it. I should be absolutely very happy to do this, and in fact I felt it myself just yesterday. What I just mentioned to you about Israel here, although from our perspective back home, there are some concerns after actually coming here, it's not really like that. And, I also feel that if we happen to have some collaborative opportunities, I've seen scientific creativity here in these areas. I feel great admiration. But I think it's very necessary if we could also collaborate further in the exploration of the mind, perhaps at some point in the not so distant future, at least for humanity, as even if it's just a small contribution like a tiny flame, if I can pass on a bit of light within my ability, I would be more than willing to do so, absolutely. As for the specifics, I still need to consider my schedule at this point in time, but it really shouldn't be a problem. If we can handle many things in advance, that's wonderful.
Bandara